The night the sky tore open, most people thought it was just another meteor shower. Cameras pointed upward, news anchors filled the silence with guesses, and families sat on rooftops enjoying the glow. But then the lights changed. They grew brighter, sharper, and suddenly the streaks in the sky weren't falling, they were struggling. Something was trying to slow down. Something was trying not to crash. When the object finally hit the outskirts of a quiet town, the ground shook hard enough to wake every sleeping dog. People rushed outside, some with phones, others with fear in their eyes. No one expected what they were about to see. The wreck wasn't metal the way everyone imagined a crashing ship to be. It looked alive, almost like a giant shell cracked open from the inside. And from its broken center came soft sounds, not roars, not threats, just frightened, unfamiliar voices. Authorities arrived fast, pushing crowds back, shouting for distance. But the rumors spread even faster. Aliens, invaders, everyone had an opinion, and every opinion fed a little more panic. Still, no one actually saw anything dangerous. No explosions, no strange beams, no signs of attack. The wreck didn't even move anymore. It only breathed out faint puffs of light, almost like a heartbeat slowing down. Then someone noticed the movement, a small figure stumbling out from the fractured shell. It was shaking, holding its arms close to its body as if cold. The creature wasn't tall, wasn't monstrous, wasn't covered in claws or metal. It looked lost, scared, and when its gaze met the humans watching it, it didn't charge or scream. It simply lifted its hands in a universal gesture. Every parent, every child, every human understood. Please don't hurt me. That moment could have gone terribly wrong. One shot fired out of fear, one scream in the dark, one misunderstanding, and history might have written a very different story. People held their breath, waiting to see who would act first, humans or the frightened visitors who clearly hadn't meant to end up here. Whispers spread through the crowd about whether these beings were refugees, travelers, or just unlucky explorers who chose the wrong path through the stars. A few volunteers stepped forward, slowly, hands open, showing they meant no harm. Their hearts pounded, their legs shook, but something inside them refused to let fear make the choice. Instead of responding with suspicion, they responded with compassion. Someone offered a blanket, someone else offered water, and for a moment it felt like the world paused to watch this fragile, unfamiliar connection being built. But just as calm began to settle, the wreck behind the creatures pulsed again, this time brighter, deeper, with a tone that made everyone's skin crawl. The small beings turned toward it in panic, communicating in rapid, trembling sounds. Something was wrong. Something inside that ship shell wasn't done yet, and whatever was waking up didn't feel as gentle as the ones who had just stepped out. The crowd took a step back. The volunteers froze, and the visitors stared at the humans with wide, pleading eyes, as if asking for help before something inside the wreck let out a sound that made the entire field tremble. The real story was only just beginning. The sound that rolled out of the broken ship didn't feel natural. It was low, uneven, almost like something heavy was dragging itself awake deep inside the glowing shell. People on the field covered their ears, some stumbled back, and even the visitors flinched. Whatever remained inside wasn't calm like the small group that had already stepped out. It felt older, heavier, and far more unpredictable. Emergency lights flickered across the field as more teams arrived, setting up barriers and whispering into radios, but even they seemed unsure of what to do. No one had trained for this. No one had prepared for aliens who looked terrified, or a ship that sounded like it was hurting from the inside. The senior officer on the ground stared at the visitors, then at the trembling wreck, then back at the silent crowd. No orders came. No one wanted to be the first to force a move that could spark something dangerous. Among the visitors, one stepped closer to the humans, pointing at the wreck with trembling hands. It tried to speak, its voice soft and rhythmic, like fragments of a language struggling to find shape. People leaned in, trying to understand. The creature repeated the gestures again and again, growing more desperate with each attempt. Its body language said everything its voice couldn't. Something inside that ship needed help, and fast. But how could anyone step closer when the air around the wreck felt wrong? There was a faint vibration rising from the ground, spreading outward in slow, steady waves. Grass quivered, dust lifted. Even the lights set up by the emergency teams flickered every few seconds, as if something unseen was interfering with them. Someone whispered that the ship might explode. Someone else said it might release a field of unknown energy. The guesses only raised more questions, piling uncertainty on top of fear. Still, not everyone stepped back. A few people, volunteers, the kind who always moved toward those in need instead of away, slowly approached the frightened visitors again. They wanted answers, wanted to help, and wanted to understand what had really happened in the sky. One of them pointed to the wreck, then to themselves, trying to ask whether humans could safely get close. The visitor shook its head quickly, then made a gesture like something collapsing inward. Whatever was happening inside wasn't stable, and it wasn't stopping. The background of the crash slowly began to unfold through fragmented communication and cautious observation. It became clear these beings had not come as conquerors or explorers. Their ship showed signs of damage long before it entered Earth's atmosphere: burn marks, cracked plates, strange fractures that suggested it had been through something violent far from this planet. The crash wasn't planned. It was survival. They had been running from something or escaping something or trying to keep something contained, and maybe they hadn't succeeded. As the minutes passed, the pulses from the wreck grew stronger. The visitors huddled together, whispering in rapid tones, stealing nervous glances at the humans as if torn between warning them and begging for protection. The volunteers exchanged uneasy looks, sensing that the crash site wasn't just a scene of an accident, it was the start of a much larger problem. Then, a sharp crack ripped through the air. The ship's surface split a little more. A deeper light spilled out, brighter than before, casting long shadows across the field. The visitors gasped and stumbled back. One pointed urgently at the humans, motioning for them to move away, to run, to do anything but stand still. But no one moved. Everyone was caught between fear and instinct, between compassion and confusion, and whatever was waking up inside that ship had finally begun to push its way out. The crack in the ship widened with a grinding sound that made everyone tense. A thin beam of shifting light spilled out, twisting through the air like it was searching for something. It wasn't bright enough to blind, but it had a strange pulse that made people's skin prickle. The visitors reacted instantly, forming a small barrier around the humans closest to the crash. Their movements were sharp and protective, as if they knew exactly what that light meant. One of the volunteers noticed at first the visitors weren't shielding themselves, they were shielding the humans. That detail spread quietly among the group, adding another layer to the mystery. Why would beings who had just crash-landed risk themselves for strangers on another world? It didn't match the wild rumors of threats or invasions. If anything, it hinted at a deeper conflict, something they were running from or trying to keep contained. Scientists arrived next, their equipment humming softly as they measured the strange energy leaking from the wreck. None of their devices gave clear readings. Some flickered with static, others shut off completely. One of the scientists whispered to a colleague that the energy wasn't behaving like anything known on Earth. It felt reactive, like it responded to movement or emotion. That comment spread fast, making the crowd more uneasy. Meanwhile, the visitors' behavior grew more frantic. Their small group kept exchanging gestures, pointing toward the cracked section of the ship and then at the sky. One of them gave a long, trembling exhale that sounded almost like a warning. A volunteer tried to mimic the gesture, asking if something was coming. The creature nodded slowly, its eyes dimming with worry. The tension deepened when military teams appeared along the field's edge, forming silent lines. They didn't raise weapons, but their presence shifted the atmosphere instantly. People stepped aside, some relieved, others nervous. The visitors noticed them too and pulled closer together, uncertain whether the humans in uniform were there to help or judge too quickly. A quiet argument broke out among the emergency leaders. Some insisted the visitors should be moved for their safety, others said it was too risky to approach the ship. The scientists argued they needed more time. The volunteers argued the visitors needed help immediately. No one agreed, and every moment lost made the pulses from the ship stronger. As pressure grew, subplots began forming naturally among the people gathered there. A journalist whispered urgently into a camera, capturing every tremor of light and every frightened glance. A family stood near the barrier, torn between curiosity and fear, debating whether they should take their children home. A young tech worker live-streamed the event, trying to reassure viewers that compassion mattered more than panic. Among all these human stories was the quiet truth the visitors were trying to communicate. The real danger wasn't them, it was the thing trying to break free from the ship. The ground vibrated again, harder this time. The cracked section of the wreck bulged outward, then snapped back as if something inside was pushing the hand. The shell was barely holding together. The visitors cried out and pointed at the humans, urging them back. Their bodies shook with fear far stronger than before. Whatever was inside wasn't just waking up, it was trying to escape, and from the way the visitors trembled, it was something even they were afraid of. The next pulse from the wreck wasn't just light or sound, it came with a sudden drop in temperature that swept across the field like a cold breath. People flinched and grabbed their arms, while the emergency lights flickered weakly, struggling to stay on. Even the visitors staggered, their bodies reacting sharply to the change. Whatever was trapped inside the ship was affecting the environment now, stretching its influence beyond the cracked shell. The scientists exchanged tense looks, hurriedly adjusting their equipment as the readings spiked. One of them muttered that the energy pattern had shifted again, becoming unstable in a way that suggested the barrier inside the ship was failing. Another whispered that if the containment broke fully, they had no idea what Earth might be exposed to. Every guess made the crowd more uneasy, but no one wanted to leave. Everyone was waiting, hoping, fearing what would come next. The military teams took a cautious step forward, forming a tighter perimeter. They didn't threaten, didn't shout commands, but their quiet communication made it clear they were preparing for something far worse than a simple crash site. The visitors noticed the shift and grew more anxious, raising their hands in quick, pleading motions. They weren't trying to attack. They were trying to warn. A deeper vibration rolled through the ground, strong enough to rattle the nearby equipment. Dirt lifted in small bursts, and the air trembled with invisible pressure. The cracked portion of the ship stretched outward again, thin lines forming along the edges like veins glowing beneath the surface. Something inside pushed harder, faster, as if its patience had run out. The volunteers who had stayed closest to the visitors from the beginning exchanged frightened glances. One of them stepped forward carefully, speaking in a calm voice, trying to reassure both humans and visitors alike. But before they got out more than a few words, the ship let out a low, resonant hum that silenced the entire field. It wasn't loud, but it carried weight like a warning bell before something irreversible. People instinctively stepped back. Even the military held their ground but didn't advance. The visitors huddled closer, their bodies trembling as they watched the crack widen by a fraction more. Their eyes were full of fear, but also something else: resignation. They had expected this. They had hoped it wouldn't happen, but now that it was, they seemed to understand exactly what was coming. More fragments of the ship began peeling away, floating upward as if the air had turned weightless. The pieces spun gently, circling the crack like debris caught in a silent storm. The scientists panicked at the sight, shouting for everyone to retreat, but the ground's vibration made it hard to move without stumbling. A sudden gust of wind shot outward from the wreck, nearly knocking several people off their feet. It wasn't natural wind, it felt charged, alive, carrying a faint whispering sound that no one could properly describe. Someone in the crowd cried out that the ship was opening. Another yelled for the lights to be shut off, but nothing could drown out the growing hum of whatever was breaking free. The visitors finally acted. One stepped forward, pointing directly at the humans who had stayed closest, those who had shown them kindness. Its gestures were urgent, desperate, begging them to leave, to run, to get as far away from the ship as possible. But the volunteers hesitated, torn between fear and their instinct to help. They didn't know what the visitors had been containing, or what danger they themselves now faced. The crack ripped wider with a sharp splitting sound. A blinding surge of shifting light burst outward, forcing everyone to shield their eyes. The wind roared, the light surged, and the vibrating ground felt ready to split apart. Then, in the center of it all, a shadow took shape inside the glowing opening, large, unsteady, and unmistakably alive. Everyone froze. The ship wasn't holding cargo, it was holding something powerful enough that even its own crew had been terrified of it. And now, it was finally breaking free. The shadow inside the glowing opening shifted again, slow at first, then with a sudden twitch that sent another wave of icy air across the field. People fell silent, unable to look away. The visitors dropped to their knees, not in worship but in fear, pressing their hands to the ground as if bracing for impact. Whatever was emerging wasn't just dangerous, it was something they had tried to restrain with everything they had left. The shape leaned forward, its outline flickering as if it wasn't fully anchored to this world. For a moment, no one could tell if it was solid or something made of light and pressure. The hum from the ship deepened, vibrating through everyone's bones. Scientists scrambled back, pulling equipment with shaking hands. And the military tightened their formation, unsure whether they were preparing for defense or disaster. Then something unexpected happened. The shadow stopped. It froze at the edge of the opening, almost as if it sensed the humans gathered outside. The light around it flickered, dimmed, then pulsed sharply once, twice before suddenly collapsing inward. The figure retreated, not fully, but enough to leave the crowd confused. The visitors jerked their heads up, startled by the change, exchanging hurried gestures that didn't match the panic from moments before. A second pulse came from the sky. A ripple of light swept above the field, faint but visible, like a thin curtain shimmering in the atmosphere. People gasped and pointed upward as circles of distortion began forming high above the clouds. It wasn't thunder, it wasn't lightning. It was something bending the air, shaping it into patterns no natural storm could create. One of the scientists stared upward, whispering that the energy signature wasn't coming from the crashed ship, it was coming from somewhere above Earth. Something was responding to the crash. Something that had been searching. The visitors reacted with shock, not fear this time, but disbelief. One of them pressed its hands to its head and let out a sound that carried sorrow more than terror. The others backed away from the ship, not toward safety, but toward the humans, as if seeking protection rather than offering warnings. That movement alone shifted the tension. The true threat wasn't only the thing trying to break free inside the wreck. The visitors hadn't simply been fleeing it, they had been fleeing whoever was now arriving through the rippling sky. The military noticed the shift and immediately radioed for evacuation orders. No response came. The radio only buzzed with broken static, interrupted by faint tones that didn't belong to any Earth transmission. The air pressure dropped again, and the circles in the sky began to spread outward, forming a spiral that glowed brighter with each rotation. A few people wondered aloud if this was a rescue party, coming to retrieve the crashed travelers. But the visitors' trembling bodies told a different story. Their eyes fixed on the sky, not with hope, but with dread. Whatever was coming wasn't here to help them. It was here because they had escaped. A deeper tremor shook the field, and the shadow inside the wreck responded instantly, surging forward again as if reacting to the signal from above. The light around it spiked wildly, engulfing the cracked edge of the ship. The visitors stumbled back, torn between the danger behind them and the threat forming above. A volunteer shouted for everyone to move back, but there was nowhere to go. The ground shook again as the circles in the sky reached their final shape, a massive spiraling pattern that glowed like a doorway. The ship on the ground pulsed violently. The sky above pulsed back. Two forces were calling to each other, and humanity stood trapped in the space between them, watching as the real battle, one they didn't understand, was about to begin. The spiraling doorway in the sky grew brighter until it painted the entire field in shifting white and blue. People shielded their eyes, barely able to breathe as the pressure thickened around them. The visitors huddled together, their fear rising with every pulse from above. And then the ship on the ground answered one last time with a surge of energy so strong that the cracked shell lifted slightly off the dirt. The shadow inside stepped forward. This time it didn't retreat. It pushed through the broken opening, revealing a towering outline that shimmered like a figure made of fractured glass and light. It wasn't monstrous, but it radiated the kind of power that made instinct whisper danger. The visitors cried out a desperate mix of warning and grief as the being stabilized itself in the open air. But the shock came when it turned toward the sky instead of the humans. A low hum rose from the being's core, a sound that didn't match the visitor's tone or the ship's vibrations. The scientists froze as they realized the being wasn't just reacting, it was communicating with whatever was coming through the vortex above. The sky answered. A beam of concentrated light descended from the spiraling doorway, cutting through the clouds with perfect precision. Everyone braced for an attack, but instead of striking the ground, the beam stopped directly in front of the glowing figure. The two energies met, creating a shockwave that rolled across the field like a burst of warm air. Dust lifted, lights flickered, and the visitors pressed their foreheads to the dirt, trembling in fear and recognition. The being from the ship raised its hand steady, focused, and pushed back against the beam. It wasn't trying to escape Earth, it was trying to block whatever was trying to come through. The field filled with a deep vibrating tension as the sky's beam brightened. The being pushed harder, the light around its body growing sharper. The visitors watched with wide, agonized eyes as if they already knew how this battle would end. Then the unexpected happened. One of the volunteers, shaking but determined, stepped forward and placed a hand on the being's arm. No one understood why. It wasn't logic. It was instinct. A simple human impulse to help someone fighting alone. The energy flared around them, but instead of throwing the volunteer back, it shifted, stabilized, strengthened. The being's glow steadied. The sky's beam faltered. The visitors gasped as the energy between Earth and the vortex flipped direction. Instead of pulling something out, the beam began pulling something back in. The swirling doorway trembled, shrinking around its edges as the being forced the connection to collapse. The light grew too bright to look at. The ground shook one last time, and then the sky snapped shut with a sound like distant thunder. Silence fell across the field. The being's body dimmed, its outline fading like smoke in sunlight. The volunteers rushed forward, but the creature gave a small, almost peaceful gesture. It had finished what it came to do. It had stopped whatever force had been chasing the visitors, and it had chosen this world as the line it would not allow them to cross. With one final flicker, the being dissolved into drifting particles of light that floated upward and vanished. The visitors stared in stunned disbelief, murmuring soft sounds that carried gratitude and sorrow at once. Just when people thought the danger was over, a faint ripple appeared high above, barely visible, almost gentle. It wasn't a threat. It was a signal. Something or someone out there had witnessed everything, and now Earth was no longer unknown to the stars. For a long moment, no one moved. The field was quiet except for the soft breeze carrying away the last traces of glowing dust. People stared at the sky, half expecting the spiral doorway to reopen, but nothing appeared. The world looked normal again, almost calm, as if the chaos of the past hour hadn't happened at all. Slowly, the visitors lifted their heads. Their bodies were tired, their movements shaky, but their eyes held something new, a quiet relief. They stood together in a small circle, whispering softly, their tones no longer filled with panic. One of them placed a hand gently over its chest, then extended it toward the humans. It wasn't a gesture of fear or desperation anymore. It was gratitude. The volunteer who had touched the glowing being earlier stepped closer, still unsure if they had helped or just been lucky. One of the visitors reached out and touched the volunteer's hand, offering a soft sound that didn't need translation. Even without sharing a language, everyone understood the meaning behind it. They weren't alone anymore. Not in fear, not in hope. The military teams lowered their guard. Scientists cautiously approached the cracked ship, though it no longer pulsed or hummed. It had become nothing more than a quiet shell now, its energy drained after the struggle. When they examined it later, they would find that most of its internal structures had melted or collapsed, leaving little to learn and even less to fear. The ship had served its final purpose. People from the crowd slowly came forward, unsure if they should help or give space. But the visitors didn't pull away. They allowed blankets to be wrapped around them, allowed water to be offered, allowed gentle words to be spoken even if they didn't understand them. They recognized kindness, and that was enough. As night slid toward dawn, the emergency teams organized a safe place to bring the visitors for rest and medical care. The scientists promised to work respectfully, the volunteers promised to stay near, and local families sent supplies without hesitation. Suspicion faded. Compassion took its place. What started as fear ended as something unexpectedly human, the instinct to help those who had arrived lost and hurt. The government released a simple statement just before sunrise, confirming a non-hostile extraterrestrial encounter and asking the public to remain calm. But people didn't need the reminder. They had seen with their own eyes how danger had been met not with weapons, but with courage, connection, and empathy. And they had seen the visitors risk themselves to protect Earth from a threat that followed them across the stars. Over the next weeks, the visitors slowly recovered. Communication remained difficult, but small understandings grew between them and the humans around them. Drawings replaced words. Simple signs replaced sentences. Trust replaced fear. Their story spread around the world, inspiring conversations about unity, responsibility, and what it means to meet the unknown with an open heart instead of a closed fist. As for the faint ripple left in the sky, it faded with time but never fully disappeared. It remained like a quiet reminder Earth was now marked on someone's map, but instead of fear, the thought carried a different feeling. If humanity's first real test had been compassion, then maybe that was what the universe would remember. The visitors stayed not as prisoners, not as mysteries, but as guests. And humanity learned that sometimes the most powerful message you can send into the cosmos isn't strength or technology, it's kindness.